Welcome to the Children's Mental Health Learning Series. I'm Vera Blower, Manager of Early Learning and Child Care with the Calgary and Area Child and Family Services. I would like to welcome both the in-person and web audience. Dr. Christina Rinaldi will be presenting today. For those of you who have watched either the live presentations or recorded sessions, you will know that the development of this series has been in response to requests from Human Services staff. The variety of topics that have been presented to date focus on supporting staff in their daily work with children and families. Parents, caregivers, educators, and healthcare personnel may also find these sessions helpful. Throughout this series, there has been an emphasis on the developing brain and how early experiences shape the brain and overall development. The focus of our presentation today will be on the different adult and environmental supports children require for healthy social and emotional development. Dr. Christina Rinaldi is a registered psychologist and a professor in the Department of Educational Psychology in the Faculty of Education at the University of Alberta. Her research focus is in the area of social and emotional development of children and adolescents, with an emphasis on family, peer, and school relationships. Her interests and research activities concentrate on children's primary relationships with their family and peers, and their links to the development and maintenance of social competencies in early and middle childhood as well as adolescence. Currently, she is investigating how mother-child and father-child relationships in early childhood foster or hinder adaptive social and academic behaviors. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Christina Rinaldi.
Continue on the series, the Mental Health Learning Series, and specifically focusing on early brain development, the social, emotional, and health of brain function. But specifically today, I'm going to be talking about how we promote social and emotional well-being, and even to talk about a little bit, what is well-being? What does that mean? And what can, and I realize there's a really broad group from parents to caregivers to educators to professionals of who can support that in children and youth. So I look forward to this morning's session, and I know that there's questions at the end. Luckily, we can engage in some of that discussion later on. So to begin, what is development? We hear this word often. We can think of it as periods of development where we start at conception and prenatal, infancy, early childhood, and then middle childhood and adolescence, or for those who work with children and youth, we hear these are the main periods. What we're going to be focusing on today is infancy, early childhood, and middle childhood specifically, and social emotional well-being. But just to think about development and lifelong learning as a continual process. Those stages are more for the individuals who are studying it to better understand the milestones. And I'll give you examples of those later on. But the dimensions of development, there are many of them. And while they're separated here into physiological, cognitive, social, emotional, and behavioral, they're really all interconnected. And sometimes it's difficult to really separate them out. And I think that will become apparent as we have a discussion today about how to promote social and emotional well-being. We'll see, oh wait, there's some cognitive strategies. Oh wait, there's some physical ones that come in too. So just that awareness of how complex development can be. Again, what is child development? We can think of it as in quantitative changes. We talk about, or we might hear about growth. But really when we're talking about growth, we're talking about those physical markers. When children grow a few inches, when they gain weight. That's really what growth is. It's more quantitative and measurable. When we're talking about development, though, we're talking about the qualitative changes. So changes in the way that children think, the way they behave, and even perceive the world around them. For example, a toddler does not have yet the ability to perspective take and understand that other individuals might believe or think differently than they do. And therefore, you might be operating at in a different way and engaging with anybody who's engaged with a 2-year-old knows that. or has that experience. But around 4 and 5, it's developing and starting to shift in that they're starting to get, oh, Jacob has a different idea about this. He might have a different perspective. And so we see that as a qualitative change in how children think. That's just one example, but there are many ways of these qualitative changes over time. So thinking of child development and then thinking about specifically infancy, early childhood, and middle childhood, the idea of what does it mean to be healthy. I think we get asked this without having to define it a lot of the time. How are you feeling? We ask this of each other often, right? With our friends and our coworkers and colleagues. And what do we mean when we respond? What do we focus on? Do we focus on the physical, the cognitive, the social emotional? Here's the World Health Organization definition, which I found was pretty useful. And it says, health is a state of complete physical, mental, and social well-being, not merely the absence of disease or infirmity. So then I go, I have to step back a minute. What are they saying here? They're defining it as a state, and not a one-time point state. It's a continuous state of physical, mental, and social well-being. And I think it's really interesting that social and mental well-being is in there too, because my question, although I didn't ask you, I didn't even give you a chance to answer it as, how are you doing? How are you feeling? I think the majority of individuals might focus on the physical. I'm sleepy today. I'm a little tired. I'm feeling down. Okay. So the physical to the mental to the social. But very interesting that the World Health Organization does take this very global approach. If you think about the different categories of development that were a few slides away, a very global approach to well-being. And let's consider that and park that for a minute when it comes to children's development and well-being as well. Okay, some indicators of well-being. Family and social environment, economic circumstances, education, healthcare, physical environment and safety, behaviors and risks, and the last one's kind of not as far as matter of importance, but it's kind of interesting that it's different from the rest. Subjective well-being. Okay, so that is how someone personally feels or perceives the situation. All the other indicators are really social system level indicators that adults in a child's world have some input, control, influence over. All right? For example, the family and social environment. However, the subjective well-being is extremely important, and when we're dealing with children, it's also important to think about that. How are they feeling and their perspective in the process of understanding. So with regard to all those levels of indicators of well-being, many of you may have heard this model before. It's the ecological systems model by Bronfenbrenner. Basically, we see this child at the center of their world, with family having very direct impact and influence on the child's development. But what we also know, related to the indicators that were listed there, like health care and educational systems, is that we also know that at the exosystem level, at different levels, we have social services, we have government agencies, school boards, and economic conditions, which are very forefront today in the world as far as discussion as how are the children and youth doing, not only in Alberta, in our country, but in different parts of the world. They're tied together to those different kinds of indicators. Some they don't have direct influence upon, but they indirectly do influence the children's markers of well-being, because it may also influence how their parents are managing and what choices it makes for families directly. Importantly to note, this model includes many, many different perspectives. It doesn't exclude things like attachment theory or learning theories in understanding how social and emotional well-being comes to be. For example, a transactional model sees the child and the environment transactions. It does not focus on the initial state of a child or the initial state of an environment. So our particular event. It looks at the complex interaction of environment and child kind of exchanges over time. And I mentioned attachment theory, and I also mentioned learning. So at a family level, creating very specific, warm, receptive bonds with children are essential. That is, can be included and understood within an ecological model. It is not at the exclusion of. The ecological model would also entertain the fact that we learn about social and emotional well-being from others. So take regulating emotions, for instance. This is a lifelong process, and it is learned from caregivers and those around us, and peers as well. And we can learn that from direct intervention. I'm going to give you an example of a tantrum later on. I'm not going to throw one, but I will give you. That would be entertaining, but I won't do that. I'll speak about how to manage some tantrums and what that means. But we can directly intervene and do something, and children learn about how we intervene in those moments. But the other thing that they really learn from, so this is from a learning theory perspective, is vicariously. That is, we observe adults, we observe peers, we observe models in the media, many, many different ways, and the responses they get to situations. So there are really multiple ways of learning and getting messages about social and emotional well-being. So, having said all that, what do we consider, or what are some of the definitions out there for child mental health? And I probably have lots of experts in the room on this as well. But we know that all those indicators and all of that groundwork really leads to influence the capacity, so having positive mental health, it helps us form relationships, it helps us feel and think, it helps us communicate, and cope with loss and change. That list is really what we do day to day in living life. Forming relationships, feeling and thinking, communicating, and coping with loss and change, or transition and change. And mental health supports our social functioning, our productivity, and our well-being and health. So it's really crucial to almost everything we do. So before we get into the nuts and bolts of what are the things that adults can do, adults in children's world can do to help promote social emotional well-being, I think it is an important piece. I work with students in training who are psychologists. I work with teachers in training as well, and other professionals, speech and language, OT, and youth care workers. And I often do this exercise with them because I find it's quite important that we examine our own beliefs as the adults who are working with children. And I do this because beliefs of children can be so ingrained that we are not even aware of them, but they do surface in perhaps the choices we make and the behaviors that we model. So I'm not going to show you this very controversial. It's controversial because there's two sides. The no kids allowed ban, I picked that just as an example. So has anybody heard of banning children from restaurants? Okay. Dare I ask, who's in favor? There usually is like half of the room maybe banning from restaurants. Does it matter if it's a fancy restaurant, really expensive restaurant? Should we ban kids there? And those who might not, to a group of early childhood and childhood youth care workers, of course, would anybody be in favor that no, we should not have a ban on children? It could be airplanes too. I just rode an airplane. It was a very quiet ride, but I'm just saying if there are children who are screaming and very loud, there's also been this debate about, well, they shouldn't be on airplanes either. Okay. Well, what does this have to do with our beliefs? How you respond to it, perhaps, really puts it on focus about your beliefs about child development or children's role in development or children's role in society. What is their place? What should they be doing? What should the adults around them be doing? So that's really kind of an important piece. Our first ideas about children and learning come from our childhood interactions, from our parents, our teachers, other adults, and our peers. How did they teach us, motivate us, reward us, or punish us? What did we experience that helped us learn or that prevented us from learning? So it's really that example of the band, so I'm not going to get you to debate it. I'm not going to say Amy needs to stand up and argue in favor of one point or the other. But it's important to identify and challenge our beliefs. And I think a lot of the time we react. In other words, this is what I feel, but I'm not sure why. I don't know why I chose that. I don't know why I believe that. I just do. So today is a little bit about challenging that, especially when it comes to social and emotional well-being. Why do you believe these are indicators of social and emotional well-being or well-being in general? Why do you think these might be detrimental? It's identifying those pieces as well as you shape the environment for yourself and for those children that are around you. Okay, a little more about beliefs. How we see, feel, and interpret behavior is quite critical. So, asking questions in four-year-olds basically goes hand in hand. But I have two stories about this. I have one mom. She's the mother of 4-year-old Zach and describes his constant questioning of everything. She sees it as annoying and tiring. And when she asks him to go to bed, he asks why. And when it is bedtime and he has to brush his teeth, he asks, why do I have to brush my teeth? And why does he have to put on those pajamas right now? And why, and why, and why? She is exhausted by this incessant questioning, and she basically thinks that he's doing this to really get under her skin, and it's his job to annoy her. That's her perspective. Okay, but Jacob's mom, also a 4-year-old, he says, he asks lots of questions, and she says, he's so creative. He has so much interest. His brain is like a sponge. He wants to know about everything. And I find it fascinating when he asks questions, because I'm thinking that's how his little mind is working. Sometimes he says the silliest things. It doesn't make sense, but it's so interesting to her that he's asking these questions. Okay, two very different, and for many, many different reasons possibly, perspectives on 4-year-olds and asking questions. But clearly these two mothers have a very different experience of the same kind of behavior, even though their histories might be different, and the framing of that. So let's consider that when we think about social and emotional well-being today and the different kinds of things that we're looking for. I love that picture just because it has so much potential and possibilities. So our ideas about how children learn and develop remain largely unexamined or unconscious, and yet they influence the choices we make every day. By exploring our own beliefs about children, about learning, and rethinking these beliefs and remaining open to new ideas, I think that is really one of the key things or take-home messages, is that open to possibilities, open to trying different kinds of things. One can learn to be more thoughtful about which ideas and approaches are appropriate for different learning situations. Basically, how can we enhance the social and emotional well-being when we are faced with challenges, when it isn't easy, and when it's a little harder than we'd like. So tying to the other learning series topics, I just wanted to have one slide that really talks about the foundation, even though that wasn't the goal of today's presentation, the brain and biology and the developmental neuroscience. Perhaps some of you are aware of the core story of brain development, and specifically the idea of sensitive periods, when the brain is most capable of learning certain kinds of skills. We know that in young children, the brain is plastic. However, that means that they can compensate. So there are circumstances when children make phenomenal strides in their learning, and even if they miss that window of opportunity, that sensitive period, we've moved from critical to calling it sensitive periods in child development. Exposure to a rich environment and to nurturing atmosphere really can be the proper type of intervention that is needed, okay? But what's really important to temper this with, because we are talking about lifelong. Yes, infancy, early childhood, and middle childhood are distinct periods, and they're all really important, but we need this thread to be sewn throughout the lifespan. And human development depends on both the genetic makeup of the child. I know you probably hear this, and I've heard this many times. It continues to stay as a focus because it's true. It's complicated. It's more complicated than this one point, but it's true. It's really that interaction between what the child brings and the environment, but really more than that, it's the series of interactions over time and how the environment can actually alter and change our genetic makeup too, which is something we didn't know 10 years ago, but that we discovered through the human genome projects and epigenetic kind of research, which is not my field of study, but fascinating for somebody who works with children and was really interested in child development, because it frames our understanding of how we get to those points of social and emotional well-being as this is really interactive. It's not, oh, we're predetermined to just do this, all right? I believe that strongly because this is the field of work that I'm in as well. And so that interaction is really key. So from the early years study that was published in 2011, we can see that there's a lot going on and with the neural pathways. I hope you can see that. I'll try to describe it for you. Basically, we have synaptic information and formation that's happening, and you can see the spikes from birth to where sensory growth is happening like you wouldn't believe, because that's a very academic term, but you wanted to focus that. And in early childhood, from prenatal to early childhood, we see the limbic system. We see the prefrontal cortex only happens later on in puberty and early adolescence and into early adulthood. And we see language development. And all of those things that are taking place doesn't surprise us that with the sensory kind of information, we see the vision, hearing, and touch is developing. And related to that, or after that happens, we see that arousal and recovery, sleep and wakefulness, the development of social relationships taking place, talking and shared attention, all key critical pieces that really we can talk about health globally, absolutely, and social and emotional well-being as well as part of that. So a lot is going on, but it's really important to know from that critical and sensitive period kind of approach of what is happening and what is peaking at certain time points in children's development. So the way I've structured the next little bit is to talk about milestones and then to talk about strategies that go hand in hand with these milestones. So with regard to infants, and I did separate infants and toddlers, although a lot of people do kind of merge that as really the infancy period of 0 to 2. But infants, if we think of their social and emotional milestones, what they're doing is they're regulating arousal and sleep and wake cycles. Anybody who knows newborns and anybody under the age of 1, well, I'm still trying to regulate my wake and sleep cycles, to tell you the truth. I'd be much happier if I get more sleep. But I mean, we know that this is really key for infants. They're starting to have responsive interactions with others, great gains from 0 to 1, and the beginning of anticipation and participation in simple social routines is what we see them also become capable of doing. These are the building blocks of the social emotional well-being. So toddlers, they also have increasing voluntary control and voluntary self-regulation. I know you might say, Christina, really? Have you been with toddlers? Yes, I have. but they have increasing voluntary control and voluntary self-regulation, even though sometimes that might seem like it's not being shown. The growing ability to comply with environmental demands and requests is also a milestone of this period. And they start to be increasingly assertive, and they do desire independent action or some form of independent action. Okay? So what can we do to promote social and emotional well-being in infants? Well, it's really important to be, I know perhaps you have heard this, but we can't stress it enough, to be responsive. So what does that mean, being responsive with an infant? Responding quickly or reasonably quickly, right? To their cries, to let them know that they can depend on you to care for them. Being sensitive. It requires an awareness of the infant's signals and states. So it does mean being aware of their fatigue, their hunger, or their readiness to play. So what state are they in, and being in tune to that. It also means paying attention. It requires engaging in warm, positive interactions. So that means we should be holding and hugging infants, swaddling newborns, and there's many different ways to do this, that people do engage in this. And it means being consistent in sequences of caregiving. So those are some ways that we can, you might say, well, those are things that we do anyway. Yes, did you know you were promoting social and emotional well-being when you were doing these? I think it just gives us a different language. You might think, oh, we were just caretaking. We were doing what we needed to do to take care of the child's needs. You're also promoting social and emotional well-being, which I think is really cool. How we do it for other examples in infants and toddlers, you can sit them on your lap, face the child when you talk to them. As busy parents, we often do things as we're talking, so and there's nothing wrong with that at all. But do we save some time to actually talk? Because I'm the master of washing dishes and talking and having, that was a quality conversation, right? I'm doing something and I'm talking to you, we figured something out, I'm present, that's a different kind of present, and then taking time one-on-one, which is harder in our busy lives, it really is, but it has value. Read books and make physical contact. Talk in a soothing voice when diapering or helping clothe, because those are intimate times when you're in real close physical proximity with babies or infants and toddlers. Paying attention to individual differences in the need for regularity, novelty, and stimulation. Have parents often talk about, my children are different. Yes, they are. And some need more attention. Why did one not need that added attention in getting dressed or help with the pants on and off? The other ones do. So it's being aware of what those individual requirements are of each child. It takes effort. And provide alternating periods of stimulation and quiet. I like this because today I think we have to fight for time to find quiet in our worlds. And I think for adults too, maybe we're craving a little bit more. I don't know if we know we're craving it. Does that make sense? Do we know if we want something if we're not aware of it? But then when we do have those periods of quiet, camping season is upon us. A lot of people enjoy camping because of that separation of, possibly, from the busy schedules. But children need that adequate stimulation, but also that quiet time. So some themes that we've heard in the past, like the hurried child, come up again. That was something from the 60s and 70s, that idea. And yet I don't think we've gotten any less busy. So those quiet periods, how can we incorporate that in our day-to-day functioning and being with others and for ourselves too? So modeling behaviors desired in toddlers. In order for us to want certain kinds of behaviors in the toddlers that we are with, we need to show them the behaviors that we are interested in. And specifically, we need to use language, verbal and nonverbal, to help facilitate self-control. We need to emphasize individual control over one's behavior. What do we have control over? Sometimes pointing it out to a child. that it's within their capacity is quite important. They might not realize it right away, but it is important to make those observations for them and to verbalize, point it out. Offer limited alternative and choices. Too much choice is overwhelming. There was this one child who at bedtime, which was already a difficult time in a particular household, was offered several toothbrushes to pick from. It was a really interesting example because it's like too many choices of blue, green, yellow, which toothbrush, where it was like, simplify it. They have one toothbrush. I mean, choice is good when you're going to buy it, perhaps having them choose the color, but once in the home already, it was spending too much time on that choice, and sometimes even for the age, being appropriate or not, limiting that, because sometimes, even as adults, we say we want choice, and then when we're given a lot of it, doesn't it cause us a lot of time of grief and pause to like, oh well, no, just tell me what to do, please. Sometimes. Same works with children. So use suggestions rather than commands. It's just a habit of getting into that way of how we ask for things or how we point things out. Explain reasons for preferred behaviors. So we are talking about infants and toddlers. So we're talking about using simple cause and effect reasoning, right? If that cup is on the end, it will fall and spill. We don't want to mess, or then we'll have to clean it up. Very simple cause and effect kinds of things of pointing things out, perhaps even before they happen. They may happen. Spilled cups of milk happen. Supervise play with siblings. When they're this young, though, the supervision of play with siblings and peers, because they're really young here, would require the prevention of conflict and perhaps the resolution of conflicts. You're more involved at these stages. We do take a little bit of a hands-off approach with the older children where we want them to engage in the problem solving. But if in the early stages of infant and toddlerhood we've never modeled or shown them how to go about it, for instance, I can only change a tire if somebody showed me first how to do it. Maybe now we can look it up on the internet and we can follow help manuals and things like that. But I really do well after watching someone do it. Okay, now I'm going to try it. Or at least I have the confidence to try it. So that's why it's important to model how would we do this? How can we do that? All right. And provide opportunities for beginning play. Pretend play. Play is so important. I know we say this, but in our society, I think, again, I talked about fighting for the time for quiet. We're also fighting for the time for quality play. And this is what children should be doing. I'm getting a little bit high and mighty here and saying this is what they should be doing. I really do believe they should be playing. And the research supports that they should be playing because they're doing really important things when they're playing. So, okay. Just these pictures, I said that I was going to talk about something an example of what to do. Just these pictures get my heart rate going a little bit because they do not exude calmness, right? So we know that these little guys and girls are in a state of intense arousal here. And anybody familiar with, anybody had experience with tantrums? Personally or vicariously have seen them? Okay. So tantrums occur when young children are frustrated and don't understand their feelings. So there is a connection to social and emotional well-being. They exhibit their distress with a tantrum. And tantrums can manifest themselves in different ways. They can be long, uninterrupted crying sessions, and they can involve children throwing themselves around. They can be kicking and screaming. Some children bite themselves. They might even bang their heads. But all tantrums are developmentally appropriate at this typical at this stage. But how we react is really crucial. And I say they're difficult because they elicit an emotional arousal in the ones around them. Most, because I don't know how you cannot be sensitive to screaming and someone throwing themselves on the floor, right? So it really does get us to react. So how we respond is important. Anger should not be part of the reaction, and patience is key. Easier said than done, but patience, practice patience in these kinds of scenarios. They might need a soothing voice and a gentle touch that can calm infants, but sometimes they may be inconsolable, and they just need to know the caregiver is present and they're around. Toddlers require a different approach. They might need ignoring, or you might need to keep the child within sight to ensure that they're safe, and be ready to offer comfort when the child has calmed down and is kind of receptive to your support. So there we've seen two different kinds of what is appropriate with infants, might not be appropriate with toddlers, and just understanding that safety is important, but that your presence, you have to have them manage and work themselves off that high as well. Also very challenging, very difficult, and that's not the solution to all tantrums, but it's a really good example of how we take moments in development and really it can help us in our trajectory of learning about social and emotional well-being and how to manage really intense situations from those around us, how they respond to us, for example. So what else can you try? Well, these are some strategies, but we know that sometimes they're not enough. But here are some that have been suggested. Give upset infants a warm bath or gently rub a warm washcloth on their skin to help calm them down. When they aren't in tantrum mode, you can convey delight in each young child with smiles, giving them the message that they matter. React positively when children attempt new skills, whether they succeed or fail in the early years. That might change over time as they develop and mature, but in the early years, we're really happy with their attempts, their trial and errors, their willingness to take chances. So that's the next point, helping them feel good about taking risks. When I say taking risks, I don't mean that they're engaged in the amazing race kind of behavior, but we're talking about what is appropriate for a 2-year-old. What is taking risks? Trying something, saying hi to somebody, going to a new situation. That's what we mean by taking risks. We're talking about controlled social and emotional risks here that provide us a return, and use words to let children know that we care. Moving on to preschoolers. Preschoolers also, if you can see the leap here in the social emotional development milestones, what they are starting to do. They're more capable of controlling emotions and abiding by rules and following the rules of what's sanctioned behavior or not allowed at home or at school, at daycare. They're more capable of using language. More capable. Doesn't mean they can do it all. Their increased interest in their peers. They're starting to show cooperation, the ability to have cooperative interactions. They can learn more effective interaction strategies, and they have the beginnings. We obviously do see their ability to engage in dramatic play. So what can we do given that is their basic starting point of their emotional well-being? What can we do to promote emotional and social well-being in this age group? We can discuss topics that are upsetting. And I said, yes, I do mean talking about things that might not be pleasant, but that's relatively speaking. In other words, we can say, how do you feel when Sydney doesn't want to play with you? That's upsetting. Somebody doesn't want to play with you. Somebody doesn't want to share with you. Somebody doesn't want to invite you over. So rather than avoid conversation about instances like that, we actually face them and discuss them. Because then we're talking about not hiding from disappointment and how we feel, but actually being there to discuss what it is that we do feel. And you're there to help label, identify, and help them work through that. We can compare emotions, not by making comparisons saying one is better than the other, in that Jacob is feeling this and Madison is feeling that. So we're not saying one is better, or we're not making those comparators, but we're trying to give them explanation and context that there's different feelings that different children might be experiencing. We need to, and this is challenging, model emotional control. I gave you the tantrum example. It's really important that we model emotional control in those situations, even when we are being pushed to our limits. Play games that promote understanding of body language. I'll give you some examples later. Read books about characters that experience a range of feelings. Those are other ways that we see in programming that makes a difference. And giving the emotional knowledge, vocabulary, and context for children, they are building that. If they haven't received that, then we have to go back to these steps and say we do have to build or give them a foundation. So if children who are older haven't received that, that means that they also need to experience some of this and be given the tools of vocabulary and engagement and feeling through experience and examples. And the teaching of empathy. So Taylor is upset. What could you say to Taylor to let her know that you didn't mean to knock over her tower of blocks? You're helping put words to the situation of what's going on during play, during interactions, during social interactions, during day-to-day activities. So play, as I mentioned before, because I'm really biased on this one, is so important and key, because these are the kinds of skills that are learned during playtime. So anybody trying to make a case for bringing play back or continuing play or arguing that we need more play in our programming, here it is. Here's my list for you. It helps children focus. Yeah, play helps us focus. Imagine that. It helps with independence. It helps enhance self-regulation, because sometimes you don't get to play with all the toys that you want or play the games that you want when you want them. It enhances self-esteem because we actually experience, this is connected to the next one, feeling successful. I'm enjoying it because I'm actually doing something that I like and I'm experiencing success. So the children aren't saying this or identifying it in these terms, but that's what's happening within them. They're getting messages of success. And so that boosts their self-esteem. They get opportunities of trial and error. So I said you need opportunities for success. And I know it sounds strange when you say this next point. They also need opportunities to fail. And that's where people go, most people say, yeah, I guess you're right. Not failing all the time. That means if all their experiences are failing, and they don't experience the success, then we are concerned. But they do, in a managed context, need to, what does failure, disappointment mean? And then managing them, managing that, working through that feeling, working through those kinds of experiences, right? So, as I mentioned before, not getting the toy I wanted. For adults, we might be, well, that's life, isn't it? We don't get a lot of the things we don't want. But for children, this is where they start to learn about that. We also do see in adults some who do not deal with disappointment very well. And that is a level of social and emotional well-being. Life is difficult in many ways. And so managing that is quite important. The risk-taking, which I said before, and the delayed gratification. So I'm going to give you an example of delayed gratification in just a minute. But learning through opportunities, some calming strategies. You might provide materials or toys, art, things that can calm children down when they are receptive and in the appropriate state to do so. You use appropriate labeling of words. You have the child state reasons for emotional experiences. And depending on their age, where we are talking about preschoolers, provide water play, which is associated with more calming and soothing strategies for kids. And stress busters, a stretching exercise. Getting kids to move up. We do this even in primary schools and elementary schools. Stretching, taking a stretch break. All of you want to stand up now, I know, and maybe do something physical so that, I mean, it takes a lot of effort to sit and pay attention for a concentrated period of time. That's an actual physical stress buster. Deep breathing, music and singing. Oh, I always get a group when I get them to sing. It's okay, I won't put you on the spot, but the kids love it, right? Running and jogging, which we intersperse now in a lot of our programming from early childhood to even junior high and elementary, K to 6. Outdoor free play, it's accessing physical, cognitive, and social. And quiet reflection. So I said all these busy kinds of things. And if you remember, I talked about also having the quiet in there. So all these really important pieces that are related to social emotional well-being. How can they be? They're all physical. Does it make sense that they're related to social emotional if I'm talking about all these physical strategies? But they are. Think about it. Think about how you feel. Okay, so maybe stretching's not your thing. But maybe something on that list is. And how do you feel after it? I often hear people say, oh, I feel more relaxed. Oh, now I can go back to doing what I need to do. Even in work settings, take a walk, have your water breaks. That's what people say. It's important. So all of those steps are important. And we might not see them as stress busters, but they are for kids. Okay, the delayed gratification. So I'm going to see.
If I eat 100 marshmallows, I'll be filled.
Everybody knows that young children, particularly toddlers, 2 to 4-year-olds, are subject to impulsivity. And it has been thought that that is a characteristic that children are born with.
Do you know what? It is snack time now.
And so what we wanted to know is whether or not some of these differences between children can be influenced by their own rational thought processes.
We wanted to manipulate children's beliefs about how reliable the environment that they were in was. We assigned kids to one of two conditions, either the reliable condition or the unreliable condition.
So for the art supplies that you get to use, you actually have a choice. You can either use these crayons right now, or if you can wait for me to go get some from the other room, you can use our big set of art supplies instead.
The kids in the reliable condition, when the experimenter came back into the room, had the better thing. And for the kids in the unreliable condition, the experimenter apologized and said she'd made a mistake. We didn't have that available and then helped them use the first option.
Listen, I'm so sorry, but I actually don't have that big set of art supplies I told you about. Sorry about that. But you can still use these ones to make your project.
The classic example of a task in which children show impulsivity is what's called the marshmallow task.
For your snack, you have a choice. Look what I've got.
Marshmallow.
Yeah, so wait just a second, let me explain. So you can either eat this one marshmallow right now, or if you can wait for me to go get it from the other room, you can have 2 marshmallows instead.
I want 2 marshmallows.
And what we found, which was an incredibly large effect, the children who were in the unreliable group were more likely to fairly quickly pick up the marshmallow and eat it. So on average, they waited about 3 minutes.
And did you know I did not eat this marshmallow?
The children who were in the reliable group waited 4 times longer. So they waited about 12 minutes, which is an incredibly long time for young children to wait before they get a reward.
The difference is maybe due to a different in expectations about what's likely to happen in the world. That's what this experiment was designed to address.
Any 3-year-old, self-control is not necessarily at the top of their skill base, but in general, when she sets her mind that she's going to do something, she's going to do it.
In the marshmallow task, I was like, what you want to do is you want to get the most amount of marshmallow possible, but there may be other considerations. Given that I have this one marshmallow now that's guaranteed, what are the chances that if I wait, there's going to be a second marshmallow later?
If it was a teacher he had all the time, that if they would have that trust bond a little bit longer, then he'd probably wait longer.
One of the lines of work that evolved as a result of the marshmallow task was to look at the outcomes of children's behavior later in life. But something that's been missing from the equation is this rational process by which children are accessing information in their environment and making decisions about whether they should behave in the short term or behave in the long term. So if they're in an environment in which long-term gain is very rare, well, then it makes perfect sense for them to behave impulsively, because that's going to maximize their reward.
How's it taste?
A production of the University of Rochester. Please visit us online and subscribe to our channel for more videos.
So what did we learn from the marshmallow task? Is nothing new, but they did a twist in this particular one. And they did an experiment, and they manipulated the condition for children of what they were to expect. In other words, they gave them disappointment. They made their environment unpredictable, in the case with the little boy. And I think what's really important here is that how the environment can actually modify how children regulate their expectations and their behavior. In other words, 4 times more waiting happened, that was what they basically reported, in those children who were given the expected condition. In other words, I tell you this is going to happen, and I deliver. It happens. They were willing to wait longer, that group. And when they do the experiments, they're, these groups of kids are not differing on any other means greatly. They are supposed to be comparable groups. And so what stands out is the ones who are getting those disappointing messages when we don't deliver what we said we were going to, the behavior seems to change. I think it's very powerful because we've often focused on, kids who can regulate, those who can't. But then this brings into, and makes it very complex, the environment has something to do with whether they wait or not, because they've learned something along the way. Or it introduces at least that added element of, there could be other things going on that influence our behavior and our choices and our ability to regulate or to be patient and to look for long-term goals and solutions. So I think that was a pretty neat way of demonstrating that point. With promoting social and emotional well-being in preschoolers, we need to be responsive to preschoolers' requests. We still need to engage in physical contact with them, pats on the back, encouragement, warm hugs from parents, keep noise level low, and allow for comfort objects, access to blankets or doll or whatever might be appropriate for children. They need the physical contact to continue and to show approval. The power of language continues to be important too, and the ability to empathize with children. I say promoting social and emotional well-being is kind of like, I feel like someone's always watching me, and that's because they are. We are functioning as role models, so the different adults, whether you're a teacher, a caregiver, or a parent, you do function as a role model, and you have the social interaction styles and strategies that are being watched. Your self-control strategies are being watched, and your values and attitudes are being watched. It's not, I don't say this so that we feel tremendous pressure, which we do, like, wow, gee, thanks. That's a lot to carry. It is, but you are being watched a lot. Not in that evaluative way, but in that learning, I want to see I'm getting so many messages about what you're doing. So it's important to use the responsive guidance techniques such as using language to assist self-control, identifying for yourself, empathizing individual control over behavior, supporting the development of how to engage in inner control, giving the reasons for desired behavior. Remember the why of the 4-year-olds? Sometimes not a soliloquy necessarily, a long-winded explanation, but providing some wise answer back is helpful. And suggesting appropriate strategies in context, as well as supervising, again, supervising, that doesn't mean necessarily, and one-on-one play parents and children have, or with others, is really important too, but we're also talking about, for the social and emotional exploration, having them have an opportunity to do that with peers. It doesn't replace, it's different. It really enhances what the parents do and play with children if they do engage, and the peer play has got a lot of strong value for children as well. Moving on to school-age children, their milestones, you can see we've really taken a leap here. They're capable of self-control, conscious self-control. They can abide by rules, or at least this is what we're expecting of typically developing children. They're capable of using language to regulate behaviors. They are more interested in their peers, so they have high peer involvement. They're more capable of cooperative interactions, and they can start to use problem-focused rather than emotion-focused strategies. They can learn from discussions, so it really changes what it is that you do. Although the age range of K to 6, when we talk about school age, there's quite variability of what you do with K1 and 2 versus what you're doing with grades 5, 6 with regard to the discussions and the level of discussions. And they can play games with rules. So there's a lot of different tools or strategies that you really do have at your disposal in engaging with this developmental age group. So what do adults and parents and caregivers need to do? We need to continue to function as models, resources, and guides, but the shift focuses more now to open and frequent communication about attitudes and values. And that is a shift because that developmentally matches where children are at, to have more of those discussions and to speak about choices more openly and language and vocabulary that they have available. So if they don't have that available, you might be at a different kind of stage. The type of guidance techniques here is use problem-solving strategies involving discussion about issues again, emphasizing individual control and responsibility. It's really important to identify, if children aren't identifying it for themselves, what they're responsible for. Making those very clear for them. I'm responsible for cleaning my room. I'm responsible for helping set the table or for cleaning up after snacks or meals. What is my responsibility? It needs to be clearly communicated. Involve general principles and standards of what is expected, and again, suggesting appropriate strategies in context. Now, this is a key shift for parents and the adults too. The supervision changes. Less direct supervision starts to happen, but we're still monitoring interests, their involvement with peers, perhaps, and this is a big one that I get asked a lot about. This could be a whole topic itself, is monitoring media influences and technology, and other activities from outside school and family. So what does the environment need to do? What kind of environment supports the social and emotional well-being at this stage? Still, your number one, the presence of a trusted adult to support independence and self-control is key. We need clear guidelines of responsibilities, as I mentioned before, the opportunities and expectations of what are the consequences if I don't then clean up. If I don't do these things, what are the messages? Providing opportunity for supervised interactions with peers, although we often talk about, is there place for unsupervised? Yes, there is, but you're not there to really promote the social and emotional. They could be doing it on their own, and they will get feedback from peers, so there is a place for unsupervised, non-play dates, and free play with kids as well, especially if they are safe in those environments to do so. They learn so much as well. This is a different kind of focus when you're supervising, because especially in educational settings, perhaps in contexts, because you can really have learning and teaching opportunities there, whereas free play, unmonitored or relatively unmonitored and under scrutiny, is different, right? Can you provide materials that support constructive peer interactions? How, if you are saying that this is important, if we're saying it's really important for social and emotional well-being, then do we give them opportunities, not only the materials, but the conditions for that to take place and for success to happen? And it might go without saying, but really we need to continue to minimize exposure to negative behavior and attitudes as much as possible. We're trying to promote social emotional well-being, and we're trying to reduce that minimization of exposure to negative behavior and attitudes. Negative behavior can be anything from physical or verbal aggression, put-downs, things like that. The list I'm giving is not exhaustive, but those are some of the examples. So what are the kinds of activities and strategies that we can give children or that we can provide children? There's a whole host of them. And if you remember the list before of the stress busters, there were physical, there were cognitive ones, and there were social focused ones. These as well really are a range of different kinds of activities that help promote. The first few, grounding, mindful awareness, is really about being present and really of a connection between the physical and the mental states and understanding. The tracking of sensations, how they feel, their specific activities, being self-aware, how do I feel in certain situations, being socially aware, managing the self, so self-management strategies, and responsible decision-making. There could be activities where they learn about these particular behaviors, and relationship skills. So any activity that targets each of these really builds towards promoting social and emotional well-being. You have a whole list of different kinds, really different, all towards the same end, but activities. So let me give you an example of grounding. There's several activities under grounding, but one of them could be taking 3 deep breaths, breathe in through your nose and out through your mouth. Look down at your feet and pay attention to the connection of your feet to the floor. So I guess we would be asking children to stand while they do this. Imagine that your feet are growing roots like those of a tree. And imagine that these roots are growing deep into the earth to give you a solid connection to the earth. Just notice how it feels to be in your body and to feel that connection. It probably wouldn't be as rushed as what I'm doing here, but this is an example of a grounding activity with children, and there's many kinds of activities like this when you would be focusing on presence and in-tuneness for them, where we're teaching them how to read signs that their body gives to them, as well as other kinds of strategies. For example, mindful awareness. We might ask them to be a noodle. So you can ask if they've ever seen a spaghetti noodle before it was cooked and after it was cooked. Most kids might be be familiar with noodles, and they'll say, yeah, I've seen it before. So we're dealing with school-age kids at this point, right? But they might ask them, well, how stiff and rigid is the noodle before it gets cooked? And ask them to kind of mirror what that would feel like and what that would be like. But then once it goes into the hot boiling water, part of it starts to bend, the top part, and you kind of guide them through this activity. It's pretty fluid in how you describe or explain it to them. But you're getting them to kind of think of the transformation from rigid to noodle is another one. And that promotes mindful awareness. So all of these different kinds of strategies are important. With self-management, you might want them to follow steps of being in a stressful situation. So you pick with them what is a stressful situation for them and how they manage it. And you provide certain kinds of clues and steps to walk through it, identify strategies. So in order to be able to do this, they need some basically the pieces that I've talked about from the infants and preschoolers and toddlers. Those milestones need to be present in order to be engaging and able to do these kinds of activities, which really are exercising and promoting social and emotional awareness and well-being. Now, what about the adults? The adults have work to do too. They have some homework. I include myself in this group, right? So let's try an experiment to get you started with deepening your awareness. So I was going to say, find a comfortable place. For those of you who are at home, hopefully you're in comfortable spaces. And for the group who's here live with me, in your seats, I would say take some time to notice how you are feeling physically. Pay attention to your breathing. Are you comfortable or uncomfortable? The answer to yourself. And Where in your body do you register this comfort level? That's a question as well. Well, how do I know if I'm comfortable? Well, if I answered uncomfortable, where in your body are you noticing? For me, it would be my lower back. If I was sitting, I'd be like, it's probably strained a little bit, and that's where it would be. But for you, where would that be? What do you notice? Are you aware of your heart beating or conscious of your breathing? Perhaps you're more aware of muscle tension, relaxation, or the temperature of your skin. Perhaps you notice sensations like tingly when you feel settled enough to go on. You can start to understand your presence and your awareness of how you feel. And why would this be important? Because we're focusing on children, but it's also important to relate in what they're doing and how they need to be socially and emotionally aware. It's important for us to be able to engage in the same kinds of exercises or experiences as well, so that we can really empathize, so that we can really model, and so that we can really draw upon examples and try to relate it developmentally appropriately for children who might be at different stages. But the same kinds of connections are going on for us. Now, with regards to word exercises, you might say, that's the feeling. What about the saying? Another exercise for adults is to use all your senses to describe everything you can remember about a kind person who used words, touch, gestures, or actions to comfort you and to soothe you after something tense or something difficult happened. And if you could recall in as much detail what it was that they said and what it was that they did for you that made you feel better, that's also an important kind of exercise. Recalling, what did that feel like? What did they do to make you feel better in that very tense time for yourself? So there's the feeling, but there's also the recalling and the verbalizing and putting expression, whether it's written or verbal. How do I describe that? And being in touch with that as an adult really helps facilitate what we can do in promoting social emotional well-being in our children. So the activities and strategies that I gave, grounding was one of them, being a noodle for being mindfully aware. Tracking sensations is another one. Identifying feelings of stress. There's many activities that would fall under tracking sensations. But for one of them, it could be, okay, so when I am stressed, what does my body feel like? Can I identify those triggers? And it might be different. There seems to be some commonalities, but it might be different for some people. For some, it's actually, I can feel myself feeling cold, or for others, it might be, I can feel my palms getting sweaty, or I really feel the common butterflies that people talk about. But what if butterflies isn't what it is for you? It's important for us to identify, what is that physical response? What is that emotional response? And so those are important kinds of strategies for children as well. And social awareness can be something as straightforward as working on boundaries, understanding how close we sit to other children, when we need to give other children space. So all of the grounding, whether it is mindful awareness, tracking sensations, all of these are important activities and strategies that children can work on to promote and to get to that point of positive social emotional well-being. Now, because I work in a university setting and because students are often really concerned about grades, I throw this in there. And I'll read it out loud. Yeah, that's great, Ginger, but we're kind of busy right now working on our social skills because she's bringing up another report card with A+ on it, and she's doing well, and it even says another A+. I believe academics are really important, so this is not a disclaimer for that. However, I think what this shows is that we actually need to take time to work on our social skills. We actually need to take time to work on social and emotional well-being. It's just not something that doesn't take time or effort. We might think that it comes naturally, but it takes practice, and it takes good feedback to know when we are doing the right things. Okay? So in conclusion, I think hopefully from today's talk, what's really important is appreciating the integrative nature of the different domains of development. Even though I focused on social emotional, really you can see that the physical and the mental and the cognitive came through as well. As much as we like to talk about them because it makes it easier for us to separate the domains, they're so interactive. Adults matter. I just want to keep saying it over and over again. Because in a study back in 1992, a professor at the Université de Montréal at Quebec, he did a report on the status, and he said, I'm translating, a Quebec that's crazy for its kids. And basically in his report of research, he said that children have to have somebody, not that he basically said something that perhaps we didn't know, but have to have somebody who's in their corner and who believes in them. To make a difference in his report. 2 decades later, if not more, this still rings true. This is still about having somebody present. Our foundations are important, but my next point is, yes, they are, but lifelong social and emotional well-being is important too. So just because foundations are critical, if we've passed that point, we can still work on pieces going forward. It's not that we have to stop with that bit of information. And strategies are all around us. It's about asking for help, resources, and support of how to get the best strategies that work. And hopefully taking a bit of chances. The same kind of thing that children have to do is that trial and error and risk-taking behavior in order to have successes in the future. I thank you for your time, and now is the question period focus of the talk.
There we go. So we just asked people that are here in the room if they have any questions, if they could come and use the mic here. And I'm on the webcast to take questions from them. Don't be shy.
I just wonder what you think of the new no-tag rule with the Calgary Board of Education.
Can you elaborate for me, please?
They've implemented a new rule where there'll be no tag at recess.
Oh, no tag. Okay, I hear. I'm
Yes,
thinking it's
sorry.
like this big thing that stands for TAG or something. Okay,
no,
tag. Yes, I know tag. Well, I mean, I don't know why they made that decision. I wasn't even familiar until just now. So the ability of, like, it's a problem for them in their system, is that they've identified that it's maybe leading to, pardon? Cut knees, okay. Yep. Well, I think it would be important for that group to engage probably in a conversation. So we're at a decision-making point already, but I think it would be important for them to have those conversations to discuss what playtime and free playtime. So free playtime at school is also under certain kinds of conditions, right? The rules and behaviors of appropriate, nobody getting hurt, those kinds of things. But at the same time, when children are playing at home, are playing on the playground, we do get scrapes and bruises and pieces like that, right? So, I mean, it's difficult because there are concerns, and probably in any kind of situation or in decision like that, there's always two sides to why are they looking at that, but probably something that's a little bit more complex. I obviously believe, and the research also shows, that play is really important, and the management of play and how involved should adults be. So I think that kind of conversation needs to take place at the same time, while listening to perhaps the concerns that parents are raising, if they are raising those. And schools are very complex because there are many different stakeholders involved. And so how does everybody, kind of modeling some of the things that we put up, how do we hear everybody's concerns, and then to make the best decisions possible, right, for child outcomes, right? So I hope that answers kind of your question.
I'm not a teacher.
No, absolutely. Right. Well, related to that, and we want to leave time for questions for other people, but related to that is that idea of the controversy, so it's not a school board policy, but the controversy in real life of, okay, children aren't playing outside in their neighborhoods anymore. Why? And many reasons could be, but primarily, we're afraid. We're afraid that they are not being monitored. We're afraid that they're going too far. We're afraid that the neighborhoods are unsafe. And in some neighborhoods, we do really have to have these kinds of concerns. Road safety, all sorts of kinds of things. But it does take away the opportunities that we were talking about of having time to make decisions like, when do I cross a busy road? When do I get home from the playground? How do I know when my parents tell me that I have an hour and I need to be back in time? These are some of the things that you do end up making choices about when you're given those opportunities. But you also have to be at a point where you can handle them. So also with that idea of success and failure, we want them to succeed, not just fail, when we give them those options and opportunities to make those decisions. And the more they do succeed and get competent at it, the more we might give them to explore further.
I decided that I would be anonymous. This is my own question. Can you tell us the differences in social and emotional growth that come from organized sport versus unorganized sport? Like go crazy in the backyard or at the park versus play organized hockey, play organized soccer, play organized baseball.
No, absolutely. I mean, the organized sports, I think there is great benefit for them. I was on the soccer field last night as well, but there are rules and regulations, and also for parents, by the way, right? Even if your children tend to get knocked out of play and you want to jump on the field, don't do that. So that's very structured. They do learn things like being a team member, supporting your teammates, how to lose gracefully, how to win gracefully, and how to improve their particular skills in a sport. So, I mean, it's very targeted. It's got a focus. You have other adults who are in charge of children's learning and those skill development. So it provides a very different kind of exposure, both promoting social and emotional development and physical fitness and all those kinds of things. But the unstructured play, well, there you have opportunities for conflicts to arise, decisions about what should we play, and taking maybe 20 minutes to figure out what it is we're going to play, what game we're going to do. Even if, and this is not play, but even things like, okay, we want to watch a show now. We played for 90 minutes and now we want to watch something. You have to negotiate with your peers what it is. I want to watch the sports thing. No, I want to watch Frozen. All right, well then who's going to get what they want and how do you work through that? If you don't have the free, unstructured time, if they're always pre-programmed from activity to schedule, which there are benefits for, how do we work in, here I'm asking you to work in some other time, but unstructured time, because there are benefits. That attention, the focus, the decision-making, and the responsibility for my own time, where I'm not being told what to do. I have to figure it out.
And mom, dad, caregiver, kinship care provider, when they're having this unstructured time, we should back off. Do you think we get a little too involved sometimes when we hear the arguments start? I'm just wondering.
So in the infants and toddler, I kind of said you need to be involved then. That's really the time to be modeling and to help prevent and even help with the resolution. But you have to know that they have the skills to first be calm and to work through the problem solving and the negotiation. If everybody's safe though, like in other words, nobody's getting beat up here, or that it's not getting into a brawl between siblings and they can actually work it out, there is some benefit to not always intervening. And sometimes the intervening actually doesn't come in the moment in time. It's outside. In other words, you're giving them the strategies to think about these things not when they're in the heat of the moment. You try to do it before so that they can actually try and then you have a discussion another time after it's over to see how did it go. To really give them the opportunity. Like, changing the tire is not going to happen if you're really doing it for me. I really have to suffer through it. I don't want to do it, to tell you the truth, but I have to suffer through it to learn how to do it myself. And I think kids need to as well.
I'm sorry, yeah, I was more referring to, like, you know, the 6 to 10-year-old stage.
Yeah, they
5.
do. They need to. But like I said, they need to also have the skills and the strategies available to experience that success. But it doesn't have to be in the moment that we're starting to, like, give them those strategies. It could be beforehand, because we know those situations are going to come up.
I have a question from the web, so you can't think that it's from me. You spoke a lot about incidental strategies to promote social emotional development. Can you please comment on your perspective of manualized approaches preschools use to promote SEL and self-regulation?
So more like programs that exist already that we're adapting, I would think. Hopefully they'll, yeah, okay. Well, what they do is they're curriculum infused, and they really do help with the promotion of common language, using emotion vocabulary or even emotion knowledge, or embedding certain kinds of activities. So a lot of the programs might have some core commonalities, regardless of which programs you are using to promote social and emotional learning in preschool is really an area that I know this is going on to a great extent. I think you kind of need both. I think it's good to have that common language. The research shows providing educators, parents with the same kinds of access to emotion vocabulary and words and strategies, but not to just think that this is all we have access to. In other words, there are so many opportunities that come up that the programs do support, but that we see are happening in other spheres of social growth and contexts. So not just in school, but like you said, in personal peer time or in exchanges, at home, transition times. All those are opportunities to look at. I guess those are kind of like reactive. Here, what do we do? At the same time, the developmental pieces that are kind of key is what we talk about on the day-to-day basis and make foundational kind of integration into our programming. So there's definitely a benefit to having those as well.
I have another question from the web. How do you help a child who is very good in sports, for example, but is always being told at school to tone it down? So I'm assuming they perform really well and listen, but at school it's a tone it down.
And different activities obviously might give different results for children. I've seen some children do really well. The same exact example. They're really interested, they're really engaged in sports, and if you remember one of the slides, one of the stress busters was to engage in a lot of physical activity. It reduces some of that stress and tension in the body. Some examples that are happening at school is it possible, is it feasible to have some breaks embedded at school, not even just for this particular child, but for all children, where they do get to run around a little bit, release some tension. There's a connection to doing those activities beforehand and then being able to focus on classroom activities. So is there the ability to engage some physical activity within busy days to actually help children release that in those more structured? Again, the awareness of the body, what can that child do? Some people can sit still. I'm one of the people who can listen, but sitting still is really difficult. So I do shift a lot in my seat personally because it's uncomfortable for me. So for this child, what is uncomfortable for them, and giving them those outlets that are reasonable and are allowable within a school day. Thank you.